Good evening. Welcome to the live discussion. So, as usual on a Saturday, just to make people aware, members will be able to type in the chat. So if you can't type in the chat, that's probably why. Obviously, that should still give us plenty to discuss. The general theme of today, of course, is Boris Johnson and his allies' efforts to save Boris Johnson, and will it be enough? We're getting a lot of reports that there's likely something's going to come to a head. Not immediately. Remember, Parliament isn't sitting. So if you're thinking about all the reports, as I am, all of these reports of Tory MPs submitting their letters of no confidence in Boris Johnson, and people are wondering, are we going to get near to the 54 letters needed? I'll tell you the most hilarious one I saw today. There was a Conservative MP, and I can't remember her name for the life of me, and she lost the Tory whip some time ago because she voted against the government. It was like, oh, taking the whip off you, you little scallywag. So she's had it restored now because it's just a temporary thing. She's had it restored, and the first thing she did was submit her letter of no confidence in Boris Johnson's leadership. But these letters go to Sir Graham Brady's office, who's the chair of the 1922 committee, which is the Conservative Parliamentary Party group, and his office is in Parliament, it's in the House of Commons. So the Commons isn't sitting at the moment. So basically, Sir Graham's going to find himself. If they haven't been posted, I mean, some people may take them along personally. If an MP says they've written the letter, it doesn't necessarily mean it's submitted yet, because if they need to take it personally to his office, they can't do that at the moment, or there's no point in doing it at the moment. They can access Parliament. I think there's no one's there. So yeah, we'll take questions specifically on this. There is an interesting question there. Parcel Road has asked a few questions, but the one that sort of caught my eye. So it says the Tiverton Lib Dem. So Tiverton and Honiton is one of the by-elections that's up in 4 weeks? 4 weeks now. And the Lib Dems are expected to take it. Now, it's very similar to North Shropshire. Before I read the rest of the question, for those who can't already see it, it's very similar in that North Shropshire was a very safe Tory seat. It was one where the Liberal Democrats did very poorly. It was one where Labour were actually in second place at the last election. And it's one where the local Labour Party was campaigning on the basis of, no, actually, we're the main challengers to the Conservatives. Look, we came second. But of course, anyone who knows anything knew that was nonsense, because Labour cannot really flip a lot of Conservative voters. There are some voters who will swing between Labour and the Conservatives, but not that many. And in a very safe Conservative area, not many at all. But there's plenty who will go for the Lib Dems. Plenty of moderate Conservatives don't have a lot against the Lib Dems. In fact, you could argue that a lot of the reason moderate Conservatives vote for the Conservative Party is not because they're really Tories, it's because the Liberal Democrats do not have a realistic shot at government. So the Liberal Democrats are very palatable to a lot of these voters. What happened in North Shropshire? Big landslide for the Lib Dems. So now Tiverton and Honiton, the same thing. And the question here is, Tiverton Lib Dem candidate looks ideal to take a Tory seat, ex-military, ex-peacekeeper, runs marathons and long charitable works. Will local Labour people fight hard despite leadership policy? So that leadership policy is Starmer has basically said to his front benchers, don't go anywhere near there, you're not campaigning there. They're all off to Wakefield. Now, the answer to that is really simple. It's no, but I will have to explain. I do not know what the local Labour Party is like in Tiverton and Honiton. Okay, for all I know, it is a small, desperate group of the hard left who do not trust the Lib Dems any more than the Conservatives. In fact, don't even distinguish between the Lib Dems and the Conservatives. And they will be out there posting their leaflets and knocking on the doors, paying no heed to the tactical game at play here. But it makes no difference, because although I don't know what the local Labour Party are like in Tiverton and Honiton, I do know what they're like in similar seats. Remember, this is a Conservative area. It is not one where Labour have ever had a hope in hell, and they never will have a hope in hell. So the active portion of the local Labour Party will be very small in number. They will not have very much funding, unless they have a wealthy benefactor, because it'll be very difficult for them to raise funds. So they won't have much for leafleting. They'll have very few people available to go around posting those leaflets. They'll have very few people able to go knocking on the doors. So even if they try and trip the Lib Dems up, they won't succeed. There's not enough of them. So it makes no difference whether, you know, and I would hope they're fully on board with just putting up a token effort and no more. But even if they're not, it'll be like in North Shropshire. It'll make no difference. Only this time, it's even harder for them, because in North Shropshire, they kept trying to say, look, you know, we were in second place. Now they know that doesn't work. They can try it all they like, doesn't work. Because they said that in North Shropshire, and what happened? Massive landslide to the Lib Dems. So I think it'll be absolutely fine. Is it now time to return politics back to the streets to voice our opinions? It's never not been that time. I'm not a great one for it, I have to say. I mean, where I am is not much point anyway. I'm not a traveller. But anyone who is willing to band together and go out and do protests and stuff like that, it's always a good time. Even when you've got a good government. I mean, even when you've got a good government, it does no harm to make sure that that government, or whether it's at the local level or national level, are aware of your concerns. You know, if we had more people did that, then we'd be in a much healthier state. Let's just make sure I haven't missed anything off. I will just cover this one about the latest in-depth YouGov polling analysis as well. So YouGov have just come out. I'll actually post a link. People can see it for themselves then. Of 86 constituencies, the Conservatives either took off Labour at the last election, or they already had them, but it was marginal. And it shows the Conservatives losing all but 3 of them, mostly to Labour. Now, it has to be pointed out, I think some of these constituencies don't even include some of the ones that are also up for grabs. You know, so there are other, it's not like this 86 and it's like the Conservatives are going to lose 83 seats. Obviously, some of them are marginal and the Conservatives might sneak a few. But there are other constituencies up for grabs as well. Remember, it's like the way YouGov have done it is they've gone, if the Conservatives were within 15 points of Labour, they've counted them. But just like in 2019, we saw some big swings away from Labour. In the next general election, if things go as they are, there's all sorts of things that can change that. But if things go as they are, there could be some very big swings away from the Conservatives this time. In fact, the next general election, and I know the Conservatives are legislating to make it as undemocratic as possible. Even with that in mind, you could end up with a situation where the Conservatives lose 2024 as badly as Labour lost 2019. Keir Starmer's 58. If he becomes a PM, how long do you think he'd go on for? I mean, the age, it is unusual in this country to have a Prime Minister, because bear in mind he's 58, or I take your word for it, I know he's in his late 50s. He's 58 now. It's another 2.5 years. He could he would be 60 at least, wouldn't he, come the time he becomes Prime Minister. I don't know how far back you have to go for the last time someone became Prime Minister for the first time at 60. But yeah, but at the same time, he's fit and healthy at the moment. You know, he does his football, he runs around every week. So there's no reason why he can't go on. I've got much older people in the White House. That being said, the age to me is irrelevant in that I don't expect him to go for a very long time anyway, because, well, I don't know. I mean, again, it depends what they can do in that first Parliament. Like, my main priority, of course, is proportional representation. I want electoral reform, serious electoral reform of Westminster. I want first past the post gone. I'd prefer proportional representation. I think Labour, if they were to go there, I know the Lib Dem, I know there are people in favour of single transferable vote, and the Lib Dems are in favour. There is a very strong feeling in Labour that proportional representation is the way to go, and I really don't see why Lib Dems would be opposed to that. So I think they would go along with that as well. But anyway, I've just described Tory, another Devon constituency Labour Party. Well, I mean, that's generally how these... I mean, I went to like in my area, for example, is a Conservative area. It's not even that strong a Conservative area. It is at the moment, but it hasn't been in the past. But this is the inevitable thing. Like, I went to a Labour meeting last week, and the constituency doesn't even exist for Labour at the moment. They're trying to restart the Labour Party here. The problem is, a lot of people in a political group, a party political group, like a Labour group or a Conservative group, they are motivated to win the election. The focus is on winning the election, which is right. The problem is, if you just get an arse kicking every time, it's demoralising. So you end up with just a core of hardcore political activists. Now, in the Labour and the Conservative Party, that generally means people to the extreme wing of the party who do not necessarily think tactically. So that, you know, you are very likely, not certain, but you are very likely for that to be the model of the Labour Party in every safe Conservative seat, because more moderate people can't be arsed with it, because it's quite a toxic culture. I have you know, been involved with things like that myself. How much to print a decent colour leaflet, self or post deliver to 50,000? I can't remember. I do sort of know it's not as expensive as you would think to even have leaflets delivered to a small area. You know, a few £100 really to a sizable area. But obviously local parties tend not to raise that much, so they prefer activists to go out and post them themselves. I'll be honest, I can't be asked. I would just pay to have them posted. But I don't know exactly, but it's not... It's one of those things. If you've got someone with the funds, it's not that expensive. You can imagine local Conservative parties don't have a problem, because they attract plenty of... although I don't know, the people they attract have probably got plenty of money, but are they free with that money? I suppose that's the next question, isn't it? But anyway, we're getting off the point. Do I think Galloway will jump the shark and stand in both by-elections? Well, he can't, can he? He can't actually stand in both. He obviously, if he stands anywhere... and I haven't heard that he definitely has, but he will, you know, he would stand in Wakefield, of course. You know, Galloway's aim is to trip Labour up. He knows he can't trip the Lib Dems up. He can trip Labour up, that's all. Torbay's Labour Party are a bunch of dreamers who think every election is their time. They stand in the way of Lib Dems taking the seat. And I say this as someone who wants a Labour government. Well, unfortunately, this is the case. The problem for a lot of people is they think they're right. We all have that, don't we? We all have a bit of an ego. And therefore, it's quite easy to imagine that lots of other people think the same way you do. You know, the same people will be just thinking every time they lose, they never reflect on themselves or their side. It's always some injustice elsewhere. Or it's, you know, it's like there's no difference really between, although there's a little bit more justification for some in Labour, but there's no real difference in the attitude between some people in the Labour Party when we lost in 2019 and the Donald Trump supporters when he lost a year later. You know, and you even if you think there was some injustice, and as I say, there is some justification for it in this country, you still have to reflect on yourself. What can you do better? Like, if you stand there complaining about the media, oh, the media, all this right-wing media, it's always backing the Conservatives, it's not very fair. No, it's not very fair. But what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do? Nothing. So you have to focus on what you can do. But anyway. But all right, okay, here we go. Boris Johnson rewriting Ministerial Code on Friday seems insane. Can they really think this will wash? So here's the interesting thing. Right, let me get rid of this. Put this on. So this is the only section of the Ministerial Code that has anything to do with resignation. I'll read it out. It says, it is of paramount importance that ministers give accurate and truthful information to Parliament, correcting any inadvertent error at the earliest opportunity. Ministers who knowingly mislead Parliament will be expected to offer their resignation to the Prime Minister. Now, I'm not going to try and catch anyone out and ask, which one was that from? Was that from the one that's now just been rewritten, or was it the last one? Because I'll save you the trouble. It's from both. So I got caught out with this as well. The Ministerial Code has indeed been rewritten, okay? But the section on deliberately lying in Parliament has not. That's what it looks like now, and it's what it looked like a week ago as well. So they haven't, and I checked, I have actually got downloaded versions of the Ministerial Code as it is now and as it existed a few days ago. And it hasn't changed. And I did searches for the word resign or any word that's like resign. And that's the only reference in the whole thing. So here's the weird thing. You can look at the Ministerial Code, the rewriting of it, and you can say, in actual fact, nothing's really changed in it. It's arguably tidied up some of the language, but nothing's really changed. But from a political point of view, it's a really stupid thing for Boris Johnson to do, because what have we got? We've got media reports talking about Boris Johnson rewriting the Ministerial Code. Now, here's the thing. Let's say you're a member of the public and you're disgusted with Boris Johnson, which means you're in, very popular company, and you know he's lied in Parliament. You're quite satisfied he's lied in Parliament. Then you see a media report that he's rewritten, and you know, by the way, because you read it, that it's against the Ministerial Code to lie to Parliament. Then you hear in the media that Boris Johnson, I've got a flaring issue, sorry, that Boris Johnson has rewritten the Ministerial Code. What are you going to think? You're going to think that Boris Johnson is trying to change the rules to help himself, aren't you? Now, the reality is that that's not what's happened. But it doesn't half look like it is. So it's an incredibly stupid move from Johnson, this. Incredibly stupid move. Will losing the 2024 election split the Tory party? No, only proportional representation will do that. They'll have a period of reflection. I tell you what I think will happen to the Conservative Party. First of all, it depends on what the arithmetic is. If Labour, like if you look at some of the polling at the moment, and I want to emphasise there's so much that can happen between now and the election. So much that can happen. Boris Johnson probably is gone. Just because I keep saying that Tory MPs seem to be swinging behind him, that doesn't mean to say I don't think he won't be gone by the end of the year. I do think he'll be gone. I don't think it is possible, of course, that he will lead them into the next election in 2.5 years' time, but I don't think it's likely. So he's probably gone. Now, then it depends who they get replace him with. They could replace him with someone more credible, and then all of a sudden it's a tougher ask of Labour. They could replace him with an even bigger idiot, or at least an equal idiot, and then they're in trouble again. So who knows? But after the next election, let us imagine that Labour get close to 300 seats, not in a majority, but it's not far off, and that they manage to find common ground with other progressive parties to put forward a reform agenda, including electoral reform. And let's say the Conservatives do lose as badly as Labour did. They're on like 220, 230 seats, something like that. At that point, the Conservatives would go into complete meltdown. Whereas, if Labour get more seats than the Conservatives, but it's a long way short of a majority, which means it's very difficult then to work with other parties, because you're going to be at the mercy of not only your own rebels, but other parties as well. That'll be quite a weak government. The Conservatives, if they haven't lost that many seats, will feel that they just have to wait their chance again. They will just feel, take on the role of party of opposition, aim for the next election. So I think it depends how badly they lose the next election. But if they lose it quite badly and they end up facing proportional representation, yes, I can see it splitting. I can see Labour splitting as well, but I can see the Conservatives splitting. But you do have to remember the Conservatives have been conditioned to a state of unity. It's what makes them, it's part of what makes them so electorally successful. They have their battles behind closed doors usually, Yes, you'll read about them in the paper, but that's about it. And then they don't really brief against each other very often, except in times of crisis like we've got now. And then, you know, when it comes to an election, they just swing behind whoever's in charge. Whoever wins the argument, whoever gains control of the party, all the other factions just swing behind them. It's what they do. And so do the papers. You know, you've got to remember there's papers like the Financial Times and the Times, even the Telegraph to a lesser extent, were no fans of Boris Johnson. They didn't want Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, but they still swung behind him for the election. The future Conservative Party will need to dissociate themselves from Boris and Brexit. Yeah, but that's far into the future. You know, even with everything that's happening, I don't see a massive sea change in public opinion. I really don't. Oh, John's in there. Harold Macmillan was apparently the last PM to win an election over 60. Was it for the first time though? I suppose it must have been. Yeah. But, you know, it has been some time. It's been some time. There's nothing has really changed in the Ministerial Code. Has Johnson released the rewrite to muddy the waters in the hope it will allow him a way to avoid resignation? No, not at all. Because he won't resign. We know that now. He's not going to resign. He's going to be forced out. That's the only way. Now, whether he's forced out because of an internal leadership challenge, whether he's forced out because he gets suspended as an MP and recalled as an MP, whether he's forced out by losing a general election, I don't know. All I do know is he needs to be forced out. He's not going to voluntarily resign. You know, what we may end up with is what looks like a resignation. It's like Theresa May. Theresa May didn't resign. She said the words, but she didn't resign. She was told to piss off. You know, she wanted to hang on. She knew what was coming. The reason, you know, she was crying there, I'm not going to say she was crying for noble reasons. She was putting the party ahead of the country. But it wasn't, I don't think, out of any personal sense of shame. I thought that she realised what damage Boris Johnson was going to do. As I say, she was concerned for the damage he was going to do to the party, not the country. But nonetheless. Lib Dems at best like to get 30 seat. Yeah, I mean, like, you don't know what's going to happen over the next 2.5 years. If somehow Boris Johnson remains in charge, it is conceivable they could win more. But yeah, at the moment, it's not. It doesn't seem realistic to suppose the Lib Dems could win more than about 30. 30 would be good going at the moment. Has Sunak's recent statement to the Commons to help the cost of living crisis bought Johnson more time? Was it just another smokescreen? Well, here's the thing. I'm still waiting to see the latest. I have seen some very recent polling, right? But I want to see the polling since the announcement. I've seen polling where the fieldwork was done on the day of the announcement, but that was maybe before people had heard about it. And it didn't help the Conservatives. Basically, the polling from this week shows that the Sue Gray report did more damage than Sunak's statement. It'll be interesting to see what the polls are like next week, though. I would expect the Conservatives to get a bit of a bounce. I really would expect it. Because here's the thing. The announcement from Sunak was in isolation good. It's not enough, but in isolation it was a good statement. It's what they needed to do. The fact that they've done it late won't stop some people going, well, they did it in the end. Yeah, okay, maybe I'll vote Conservative if this is the way they're going to behave. Of course, they're not going to. Can I foresee any situation where Boris Johnson could call an early general election? Yes. If he thinks he's in a position where he's going to lose power if he doesn't. You know, it is quite tricky. If he gets the feeling that he might that it's either do that or lose power, then yes, I can see him doing that. The issue is, I don't know. I know Boris Johnson is likely to be quite delusional. I don't know how delusional. It's perfectly possible that he realises he will lose a general election if he were to call it soonish. But yeah, so I can see him calling it if he thinks it's the only way to save himself. The trick for the Tories will be to make sure he goes so quickly he doesn't know what's hitting him. But that is not an easy thing to achieve. Do I think the DUP are holding back and waiting for the number of no confidence votes to reach a point where they can threaten to use their votes to oust Johnson? They can't use their votes to oust Johnson. The DUP are neither here nor there. I don't know what sort of confidence vote you're thinking of. We're not talking about a parliamentary conference. I know I talked about it in the video today. We're a long way off that ever being needed. No. The confidence vote we're talking about at the moment is an internal Conservative Party one. The DUP don't get any say in the matter. It's only Tory MPs who decide this. So we're waiting for 54 Tory MPs to submit a letter to the chair of their backbench committee, and that will then trigger a vote. And again, that vote will only be Tory MPs, but it will be an anonymous vote. When Johnson is removed, I like your optimism. I mean, I'm fairly confident he will be this year still, but you know, who knows. When Johnson is removed, can forensic psychiatrists have him in a high security hospital to study as a socialised sociopath? No, I'm sorry. And this is the distressing part of it. You know, Boris Johnson, when he is eventually forced out by whatever mechanism, what will happen to him? He will be distraught. He will think the world's against him. Poor little Boris, right? But from the rest of our point of view, we won't really see what his problem is, because he will be once again free to earn a fortune writing for newspapers, get paid way more than the Prime Ministerial salary. He will be able to go on the speech circuit, telling crap jokes to a load of drunks who will be paying a fortune to listen to him ramble on. He will be able to write his memoirs. I don't know whether he's too lazy to do it himself. He can always get a ghostwriter, doesn't matter. Either way, it'll be a work of fiction. But he can write memoirs, and it'll be absolute crap, but it'll make him a fortune. How could it not? It'll be an autobiography from the Prime Minister who lived during the most chaotic time in British history, or UK political history at any rate. He will retire into riches. He will make more money than he's ever made before. Former Prime Ministers have a lot of earning potential. So that's what unfortunately will happen to him. I don't expect him to face any what we would consider negative consequences. The new Ministerial Code forward refers... Yeah, the forward was changed completely. Forward refers to guiding my ministers, which the current former forward said to any individual minister. Does that mean he's officially excluding himself? I really don't know what the purpose of it was. I genuinely do not know. I just thought it was a ridiculous thing to do. Given that all he's done is tidy things up a little bit, the wording of it, he hasn't really changed. There weren't any consequences anyway, really, because remember, the Ministerial Code is entirely at the discretion of the Prime Minister anyway. Like, the Ministerial Code is not something that anyone else can enforce. All it exists for, it exists to give a Prime Minister an excuse to get rid of a minister that has embarrassed the government. That's it. That's all it exists for. As a forensic shrink, Boris removed will not be distraught as he'll justify it. Well, I don't care. You know, but all I know is that he will not suffer any consequences that the rest of us would consider consequences. Not negative ones anyway. Could the Parliamentary Privileges Committee find against Johnson but not suspend him long enough to cause a recall petition? No. Not at all, because they have... this goes back, for example, to Owen Paterson, right? Owen Paterson was given a longest, I think his was a 12-day or something, but he was given a suspension that was in excess of 10 days, and it was for less than this. It's considered incredibly serious for a minister to deliberately mislead the House. And remember, let's just consider how serious this is. We're trying to say that Boris Johnson deliberately lied to the House of Commons on at least 4 occasions, because that's what they're investigating, 4 occasions, and he refused to correct the record. So even when it became obvious that the version of events that Boris, and this is why it will be incredibly difficult for them to find that he hasn't broken the code, even if it all came out right, the best thing Boris Johnson could have done was then to have owned up to it, even if he tried to get himself out of the responsibility. Because what you're supposed to do, if you inadvertently mislead the House, because that can happen, very genuinely that can happen, if you inadvertently mislead the House, as soon as it's pointed out, you are expected to come to the House at the earliest opportunity and correct the record. Boris Johnson has never done this. Never done it. And here's the question that Privileges Committee will have to ask, right? Sue Gray was able to find out a lot of details of these parties, right? Now, consider this. Last year, it emerged in the media that these parties were going on in Downing Street. Boris Johnson denied it, right? Then we had proof that they had happened. Boris Johnson says he was as shocked as anyone and absolutely appalled. Okay. Let us say that he genuinely was. Why didn't he carry out his own informal investigation? If Sue Gray could have found out the details of the parties, why couldn't Boris Johnson? Of course he could have. And then, having done that, why didn't he come to the House and correct the record? He didn't. He didn't. He hasn't admitted to anything until it's been proven elsewhere. You know, every single time he's made a statement to the Commons, all it's done is to acknowledge what is already known. You know, and then when something else transpires that he must have known about, so he's got to. The people keep thinking that the Privileges Committee will let him off because they're mostly Tory MPs and blah 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 blah. And I just look at it, I think, no, I really don't think they will. I cannot. It will be such an obvious stitch up. Such an obvious stitch up. I really don't think they will at all. Also, I'll tell you something else that's interesting. Several members of the Privileges Committee are also members of the government, and they've resigned from the government so that they can remain on the Privileges Committee. Now ask yourself this. Why would an MP resign from albeit a junior ministerial position to sit on a committee to do something like this? Because their reputation will be completely shot if they try and carry out a whitewash. Completely shot. Within the party as well as outside it. Amongst the public, their name would be mud. Who would I think would replace Johnson? Like, even though most Pixadown do think that factionalism would overrule, I have honestly no idea. I would not even like to suggest any name that will even be on the final ballot. I can suggest the names that will run. Tom Tugendhat will probably run as a stalking horse. Michael Gove will probably run as a stalking horse for someone else. Matt Hancock's probably arrogant enough to run. Sajid Javid will probably give it another crack. Rishi Sunak will want to run. Liz Truss, of course, will run. Jeremy Hunt will run. Beyond that, it's difficult to know. It is difficult, but I think those will run. Who would find themselves on the final ballot? Like, I'd be much more confident about saying who would likely win if I knew who would be on the final ballot, but I really, really don't. Because again, it's all down to individual. At the moment, Tory MPs are not willing to talk about who they back. Like, bear in mind, towards the latter days of Theresa May, you did sort of get a feeling Boris Johnson was in pole position because Tory MPs were openly speaking out against Theresa May, right? But that's not happening with Boris Johnson. So publicly, most of them, not all of them, but the vast majority are backing Boris Johnson. So we don't know who they're favouring. I don't know who they're favouring anyway. I think he said correct record on Wednesday. The thing is, though, this Wednesday was 6 months after facts were known. So he cannot, just because he might have acknowledged certain things now, and even then I'm betting there's still things he hasn't acknowledged, he has not come to the House and corrected the record at the earliest opportunity. Where's Gove disappeared to? Always disappears. At the end of the day, Michael Gove is not an idiot. He does not want to be associated with Boris Johnson's failure. He doesn't want that taint around him. So Michael Gove will keep doing disappearing acts. He'll keep coming back and then disappearing again. He does not want himself publicly associated with the mess at the heart of government. In fact, Michael Gove, win or lose the leadership contest, is probably one of the very few cabinet ministers who would remain under any winner. So it doesn't matter who wins. Michael Gove will, he is known as basically their best operator, which is grim, but there you go. Do we already know who the arrested MP was? It depends which. If there was a lot of them that's been arrested, you may have to narrow it down. If you mean the one that we're not supposed to say the name of, sort of yes, but I mean, I'm also happy to not name names, because at the end of the day you're not supposed to until they're charged, and they've not been charged. Can we have Truss as Boris Johnson's replacement? Yeah, sure, why not? Why not, indeed. Gove will never win a leadership contest, but he's the most intelligent. Arguably, yeah. The thing is, he knows himself, he said it himself, he lacks charisma. It could be argued that, I don't know, maybe Tory MPs at the moment don't feel that that's as big an issue now. I mean, maybe Gove could be a bit of an outside bet, because they may feel that in actual fact in Keir Starmer it's not difficult to outshine him on the charisma stakes, and on the other hand, they probably do want someone who's serious and can deliver policy. Michael Gove can deliver policy. And it'll all be up in the air. I really couldn't even guess what would happen. But it's. Have I heard about? There's a march on the 18th of June. I'd heard of a march. I thought it was on the 11th. I've heard of one on the 11th of June, not on the 18th. There's in Yorkshire, one on the 11th. It's Saturday. I can't put my thumb on who Michael Gove looks like. Pob. He's frequently likened to Pob, who was a Puppets type character on Channel 4 when I was very young. Did I hear correctly that Steve Baker put in a letter against Boris Johnson? So I'm told. I haven't seen it confirmed, but then again I haven't been looking at the news closely enough today, as it's Saturday. But I have heard that from a few people. Yeah, so I mean the number's definitely going up. Like at the moment it might well be on about 25 that have now confirmed. We have to bear in mind that there could well be as many people who aren't saying. They may well have submitted their letters and are just not saying. If Truss could replace Johnson, can we have Rayner replace Starmer's? Apparently no one trusted Long Bailey. That's because Long Bailey was a robot. And actually, in terms of the trusting, it was not such a case of trust. I wouldn't trust her because she's a supercilious snake. But she's also a robot with no brains. And no, we can't have Rayner because Rayner's too divisive. She's very good in her current role. Could Steve Baker hijack the party? He already has, hasn't he? He already has. Steve Baker is not really what you would call Conservative MP. In the same way you have some people in Labour that are not really Labour MPs. They joined Labour because it was the only route to power. Steve Baker did the same thing, but he's not at all in tune with the Conservative Party. You know, they wanted... because although it sounds odd, obviously the Conservatives have always represented the interests of the wealthy. That is what they stand for. But they've always shied away from, for example, weakening the country. Whereas Steve Baker is someone who doesn't care if he weakens his own country to get what he wants. Gove's reforms to education were based on how things were done in his school days and loaded tons of extra work for little use on teachers, I'm told. Oh yeah, well, I can say as a teacher, yeah, it was purely ideological. Not a great deal came out of it that was any good. I mean, the thing is, I'm not going to say nothing came out. Whenever you have a major reform of any system, there are always some good ideas that sneak into it. Because when you have a complete root and branch change of a system, inevitably, you know, there'll be some things that were resisted for a while, but given that you're making the whole system back up again, you know, that suddenly are taken seriously. So I'm not saying no good came of it, but on balance, no, it was a very poor system. And it was it was opposed by schools, colleges and universities. Who was in favour of it? Michael bloody Gove, that's all. Go on, this is one. Do we need a written constitution? Right, I'll say what I said to someone else today. I'll read the whole thing first. Do we need a written constitution? Without one, that would stop a Trump, Johnson, bearing in mind Tory plans for judiciary, etc. Will Labour push for one, or is that a fight not worth fighting? Right. First of all, this idea of a written constitution. When you say written constitution, you mean a codified constitution. We do have a written constitution. Of course we do. But codified means it's all written in one place. No, it doesn't help. It didn't help the United States. I'll tell you what we do need, and people mix these things, or they conflate these things, right? The United States was not helped by its written constitution. Last week, a crap load of kids were killed, and it's actually people abusing that written constitution that helped kill them, right? The written constitution did nothing to stop Donald Trump seizing power in the insurrection. What is it that ultimately stopped Trump? It was not the written constitution. It was a small measure of the separation of powers. What we need in this country is that. Because if we were to have a written constitution, who would write it? The people who write a codified constitution are the people who are in power at the time. The people who are in power right now is Boris Johnson and his cadre. Those would be the people who wrote a codified. And do you know what? They're talking about it. Boris Johnson wants to do that. I don't see how that's in our interests. What we want is a separation of powers. You know, we want the judiciary to remain independent, and not just independent, but so independent that a government cannot even threaten its independence. Because here's the thing, even if you have a body that is technically independent, like the BBC is technically independent still, but if you can threaten its independence, then all of a sudden it's not so independent anymore. So you need our national media, police, judiciary, and a few other bodies as well to be genuinely independent, completely independent of government. And it's very difficult to do that. You say you volunteer to codify a constitution. I'm sure you do. But the government of the time will do it. That is the problem. And so, no, I don't think it's a battle worth having. I would defer if I were to see constitutional legal experts all saying we do need a codified constitution, then I would say, well, do you know what? I'm not an expert, I'll defer. But opinion is divided. I have seen constitutional experts say it's not going to help us at all, and I am fully seized of the notion it won't help us at all. Separation of powers is what we want. How you achieve it is very difficult though. Everybody trusts that Graham Brady is an honest custodian of letters of no confidence, but is he? He will certainly be considered so by Tory MPs. Remember, this is an internal party matter. Although, you know, many of us will be looking at this potential for a confidence vote in Boris Johnson because we want him gone as Prime Minister, you know, so it does have a constitutional impact. Ultimately, it's an internal party matter. The Conservatives are in power. If Boris Johnson goes, the Conservatives are still in power. That's all there is to it. The Conservatives are in power for as long as they want to be, up until 2.5 years. You know, they can be in power until January 2025 if they want to be. There's nothing we can do about that. You know, I was joking that if we keep having the current rate of Tory MPs having to resign and losing by-elections, we might actually whittle down their majority before the next election. But in reality, if their majority started to get dangerously low, I think they'd stop MPs resigning. They would just tell them not to. But anyway. And you say, no, we don't have a constitution in the UK. Of course we do. We've got a constitutional court. It's just written in lots of different places, that's all. It's because it developed over centuries. You say a constitution can't be changed. Of course a constitution can be changed. What did I just talk about? I just talked about a load of people, load of children killed in a school last week. Why? Why? Because this huge lobby group, the NRA, insist you have to defend, what's it called, everyone? What's it called? The Second Amendment. They amended the Constitution, and they could amend it again if they wanted to. Not that they need to, because it has been argued by legal experts that the Second Amendment does not allow you to buy assault rifles in actual fact. But, you know, that's, yeah, a constitution, of course a constitution can be amended. The difference between a constitution and laws is that a constitution should, in theory, if it's codified, but again, that's part of the code as well. So when you set up a constitution, you should insist that it needs a supermajority to make changes to it. You know, a supermajority could be like 2/3, for example. It might need 2/3 of MPs to vote in favour of it, which would be a hefty majority. But it could happen, although Boris Johnson does not have a supermajority. So yeah, no, there's no weakness in our system of constitution at all. Like I said, it didn't help the United States against Trump, and it wouldn't help us against Johnson. What is needed is a separation of powers. Now, that would itself be a constitutional change, but that's what would help, making sure the judiciary is independent and not just independent at the sufferance of the government, that the government has no power, none at all, not Parliament, no one that because that's another problem we have. Parliament in theory calls the shots, but the government, because of party political reasons, usually controls Parliament. Parliament does not act against a corrupt government, generally speaking. So why do we not have a 2/3 majority to leave the EU? Because we don't have that system in place. You know, again, we have conventions in this country. We don't have a codified constitution that insists on it. In theory, we could have a codified constitution that didn't insist that you needed a 2/3 majority to make changes. But we don't, you know, it's not the law. You know, there's no law that says that you can't make a big constitutional change with anything requiring more than just like a simple majority. I mean, really, for a country like the UK, what we should have had in place was very much like the EU. We should consider ourselves a little bit like the EU. We should have had in place a system where to leave the EU, like a massive change like that, to leave the EU, it should have needed a supermajority in Westminster, Holyrood, the Senate and Stormont. And of course then it would have been sunk. Actually, even if you just needed a simple majority in each of those parliaments and assemblies, that still would have sunk it. That's what we should have. Again, you know, but we don't. Again, it's the separation of powers. Ultimately, what you always come down to is an issue not of a codified constitution, but separation of powers. There's too much power concentrated in number 10 Downing Street. That's ultimately the problem. Raab is trying to remove judicial review, and given his track record at the Foreign Office, we should all be concerned about this. He sort of has moved a long way to it already. Bear in mind, there was a whole spate of legislation passed a few weeks ago. One of them does now make it more difficult to seek judicial reviews into things the government have done. Fortunately, the latest big judicial review being sought is against the Met Police, not the government. Homosexual Americans say guns are a constitutional right that cannot be taken away or changed, ignoring the fact that it was an amendment to the Constitution that gave them that right. Well, the other thing is this: did it give them that right? Because here's the problem. You know, the gun lobby is so powerful in America. It's argued that it doesn't give them that right. You know, the right to bear arms. So you could have a saber and a hunting rifle. Will that do you? Or a single shot pistol? Will that do you? No, I want a grenade launcher. The Constitution doesn't appear to give Americans. It doesn't mean you can have whatever you want. You know, it's absolute nonsense. So, you know, I seem to remember a long time ago, a Supreme Court justice in America saying that the amendment didn't allow Americans free reign on any weapon they liked. The right to bear arms can mean just that. You can have a sword, a single shot hunting rifle, and a single shot. In fact, if you consider the time the Second Amendment came in, a flintlock pistol. You knock yourself out. See how many people you can kill in them all with those three things before someone tackles you to the ground. You know, that's what, let them have that. I haven't got a problem with a hunting rifle. There's a lot of places in America where you can reasonably hunt. Fine. You know, but you don't have, what's the reason for having a grenade launcher or an assault rifle? Utterly ridiculous. But anyway. Firearms hardly helped Americans stopping the government overreach and becoming tyrannical. Well, that's the other thing as well. They say, oh, we need the guns in case we have to take on the government. Don't matter how many guns you think you've got. And I'm sure, like the rest of you, I've seen some photos of some nutters out there who've laid out all their guns and it covers their entire porch, right? And it's a big porch. It don't matter how many guns you've got one pair of hands. If the government send the army against you, do you know what? They've got better guns, better training, and more of them. You know, the idea that some redneck with an arsenal in their garage is going to take on the government is utterly ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. But anyway. Doesn't the US Constitution say a well-regulated militia? Yeah, yes. And someone else has made the point. It's supposed to be for arming militias, which, by the way, are not a great thing to have in America these days either. Because for what you might have called a militia at one time, we just basically say now bands of vigilantes. But anyway, there's you know, they won't be told, they won't listen. We know that the majority of Americans are against it. But they can't get the politicians who'll take it on because, do you know what? The gun lobby is too powerful. In America, lobbying there's so much money in there. I mean, lobbying is quite insidious in this country. but the money is not so great. In America, it's absolutely obscene the amount of money pumping into it. Yes, it was amended to allow individuals to buy weapons because gun lobbyists figured it'd be a good way to make money, which it was. Indeed. Indeed. You know, and they go on about, the problem in the school, of course, is that people weren't armed, as if arming the children was the way to do it. And as someone else pointed out, it didn't stop someone in a Texan mall from gunning a load of people down. Texas is an open carry state. You can walk around whatever you like. You walk around with an assault rifle, no problem at all. I mean, can you imagine living in I cannot imagine living in a state like that, where you could be in the supermarket, right, and there's a load of people walking around with an assault rifle on their shoulder. They might be just doing their shopping. They might be just carrying the thing because they've got no brain, right? But how do you know that they're not just going to take it off and gun a load of people down, including you? I cannot even imagine living that life. I can't get my head around it. Who wants to do that? Who wants to just go around the supermarket when you hear all the time about nutters who just take guns into public places and kill a load of people? And every time you see someone down the beer aisle with a pissing gun, thinking to yourself, are they just carrying that because they've got no dick, or are they carrying it because they want to shoot me in a few minutes? But anyway, also creates the idea that anyone owning a gun can suddenly become a fantasy hero to deal with an emergency before the police gets there. It's incredibly dangerous to think this. It is incredibly dangerous because how many times does someone try that, the police arrive and shoot them? Because do you know what? They've come to deal with an armed assailant and they see an armed assailant and they shoot you. How many times has that happened? If I was someone with no dick and no brain, and I was in a supermarket carrying my rifle with me, and someone in that supermarket did start shooting, I wouldn't be looking to take them on. I would be hiding that. I'd be chucking that gun into the frozen peas and legging it. I would not want to be caught holding a rifle or anything like that when the police arrive. But anyway, back onto Johnson for the last few minutes. Since Johnson is a criminal, can his constituents independently of Parliament recall him? No, there's been an awful lot of nonsense going around the internet, certainly on Twitter this weekend. Not at all. No. There's only 3 ways a recall petition can ever be issued. First is if Boris Johnson is given a custodial sentence. This is not occurring. Second, if he commits a breach of I think it's the Parliamentary Standards Act. There's a specific bit of legislation that covers MPs. If you're convicted of a crime there, doesn't matter what the sentence is, then you can face a recall petition as well. In fact, I'm just thinking, with the prison sentence, if I go back, if it's more than 12 months, it's an automatic, there's no recall petition, it's automatic. But a custodial sentence, recall petition, an offence committed under the Parliamentary Standards Act, recall petition, or if you are suspended from the Commons for at least 10 days. That's the one that's going to get Johnson, right? There are no other circumstances. And to think about it, there can't be any other. Can you imagine? Let's say you had a decent government, right? With a decent Prime Minister. The idea that all it takes to bring the government down is for 10% of the voters in that constituency to recall them, and you've brought the government down, that would be madness. Absolute madness. You'd never have a government lasting more than 3 days. So no, there is no way of the people deposing Boris Johnson. We have a parliamentary democracy whereby we vote for MPs and we expect those MPs to act in our interests. So what you do is you write to your MP. At the moment, if your MP is a Tory MP, you may feel that, oh, there's no point because you don't listen to me. At the moment, Tory MPs are getting a lot of letters from Conservative voters. They're being tackled on the street by Conservative voters. People who are saying, I vote Conservative all the time. I voted Conservative at the last election, but I am not prepared to vote for you if you do not deal with this. Now, I'm not suggesting you lie and pretend to be a Conservative voter. I certainly would not. But nonetheless, it's extra pressure. It's another letter. It's another email. It's another conversation if you see them wandering around the streets. They'll probably give them a 9-day suspension to avoid this. No, they won't. I can absolutely guarantee. Like, I find it very difficult to believe that they will not find him guilty. I'm not 100% on that. But if they do find him guilty, I am 100% the suspension will be at least 10 days. At least. It has to be. Yeah? It's like a judge is never going to, like, if someone commits murder, they're unrepentant, they're found guilty, no judge in the land is going to say £100 fine. Yeah? It's not going to happen. You know, there's an expected minimum tariff here. But anyway, I might do this last one. Let's back onto America. As someone who used to live in America, it's so refreshing to see everyone here thinks it's insane how many guns there are there. Well, here's the thing. You know, the number of gun deaths in America per capita is absolutely insane. There is no other advanced economy in the world, even moderately advanced economy in the world, that has anything like it. And it is purely down to the culture, because no other advanced country has the same gun culture. It's really that simple. You know, they keep trying to blame all sorts of things. The kids should have been better protected, or oh, why was that door open, or oh, those people should have been armed, or whatever, or the police should have done something quicker. Whatever it is, at some point they're going to have to realise the common factor is always the gun. It's always the fact that you've got people who are allowed not just guns in general. Like I said, hunting rifles, okay. Hunting rifles, fine. A single, if you must to keep yourself safe, I don't see how it does keep yourself safe. So like a pistol, a simple pistol, but you know, things that are capable of dealing mass death in a short period of time, there's no justification for it. It's not there for safety. And if you had an assault rifle, if you were in a mall or a supermarket and you had an assault rifle, right, and you saw someone else gunning other people down, are you going to use that assault rifle on them? Because you'll just kill other people as well, won't you? That's what you're going to do. As well as destroy the Pringles. But anyway, that is it, I'm afraid, for this week. We'll be back on again next week, I think, at the same time. Thank you very much for coming on. Have a good evening, everyone, and until next time, I'll see you later.